Good morning. We're going to go over chapter 2 today. One of the questions I frequently get asked is how do I eat healthy and what is a healthy diet? Your chapter 2 book talks a little bit about three fundamentals: variety, balance, and moderation. So those are kind of my canned answers when people ask me that question. So, what does it mean to have variety in your diet? This means you're eating a lot of different foods amongst food groups. We'll learn a little bit more about what those food groups are, but for example, in the fruit group, you need to have about 2 to 3 servings of fruit every day. If I always made those servings apples or bananas, I would miss getting adequate vitamin C from fruit. So the concept is that need to eat many different types of fruits in the fruit group or different vegetables in the vegetable group. Balance means that I'm eating enough from each type of food group so that when we look at grains and proteins and dairy and fruits and veggies, that I have a balanced approach. We're going to learn about the My Plate, and that shows balance. We do want most of our calories to come from carbs, a good percentage from protein, and about 30% from fat. And then moderation, this is I think where most Americans have a hard time in their diets. Moderation really means looking at probably foods that we would consider more maybe bad foods or foods that we shouldn't consume a lot of, and in looking at the portion size and the frequency of those foods. So for example, if you really, really love chocolate and it's something that you want to have every single day, you should probably focus on having a smaller portion since you're having it more frequently. I love French fries. I don't eat them very often. So since I'm not eating them frequently, I tend to have a more robust portion size when I do. So let's talk a little bit about the food groups. There is the grain group. This includes things like cereals and bread and pasta and crackers. There's the vegetable group. Everything in here except for potatoes and corn, which are actually in the grain group because they're considered starchy vegetables. And the fruit group. Now, a lot of people ask me, well, what about a tomato? Is it a fruit or a vegetable? And my answer to that is a botanist would call it a fruit because it's really technically is a fruit. But because of the calorie content and the lack of fructose in it, it counts as a vegetable. So in nutrition terms, we categorize the difference between fruits and vegetables on how much fructose they have, which is the fruit sugar that makes fruit sweet. Dairy is a group, proteins are a group, and then fats are a group too. And on the My Plate, we don't really see fats as a group, but we're going to learn more about that. People always ask me too, well, what about sugar? What about candy? What about those things? Those actually fall into what we call discretionary calories. And when we learn a little bit more about My Plate this week, you'll see that you get a certain number of kind of discretionary calories every day, that things like sugar and saturated fats and things like that go into. So if I want to find out how healthy somebody is, how do I do that? Well, one of the easiest ways for most dietitians is to weigh and measure somebody. That's called the anthropometric. Anthro means body, metric means measurement. So I'm measuring something on someone's body. And typically that's height, weight. We'll learn a little bit about waist circumference as a very good measure of nutritional status, blood pressure. Those are all ways that I can measure how healthy somebody is. The biochemical assessment is things like labs. So this is like if I wanted to see what someone's glucose was or their blood cholesterol. Clinical assessment is just looking at somebody. If I were to do Arnold Schwarzenegger's BMI, it would come out very high, even though he is not overweight. So clinical assessment gives you another picture when some of these more data-driven ones may not. Dietary assessment. We're going to learn more about this, but this is really looking at someone's diet. How often do they eat fruits and vegetables? Are they getting low-fat dairy? Do they eat whole grains? How much sugar do they eat? How much saturated fat? How much salt? Then looking at a person's environment. I teach a lot of nurses, and I know a lot of you out there study nursing, and what I find when my students go on to graduate and they're working, a lot of them end up on the night shift for their first jobs, and they'll connect with me and they'll say, oh, this night shift work is really hard because my eating is really skewed. So you can tell how somebody's environment is definitely going to affect the types of foods that they're choosing to eat. kind of looked at some of these examples. So if I wanted to assess somebody's diet, what do I look at? Probably one of the most frequent ways that we ask people about their diet is for them to recall what they ate the previous day. When we look at the class activities that we're going to do in this class, and remember you have 4 required class activities for the whole semester. So there's probably, I think, 12 choices, but you have to do them during the week that they are offered. And there is one offered this week. This week I'm going to ask you to recall what you ate yesterday and look at that, look at your diet in that aspect. Also a food diary. This is very helpful for people losing weight because it can kind of help people identify some habits that they might have. So a food diary is another way. And one of the last ways is what's called a food frequency. And this is used a lot in research. So for example, if I wanted to study calcium intake in teenage girls, I might ask them a lot about their milk, dairy, and dark green leafy vegetable intake because I want to know how much calcium they're getting, but I may not be as concerned about, let's say, if they use olive oil instead of canola oil or something like that. So it tends to target specific foods. So let's look at some of the issues in Americans' diets. 88% of our population failed to meet the vegetable recommendations. These are about 2 cups of vegetables a day, not including potatoes and corn. Doesn't seem like a lot of vegetables. 84 to 89% failed to meet their intake of milk. Okay, that's 2 to 3 glasses a day. 75% of the population didn't meet fruit guidelines. Fruit guidelines are 1 piece of fruit and you need to have that 2 to 3 times a day. 20% of males between 19 and 50 overindulged in alcohol. People say, what is overindulging? For a man, that's more than 2 drinks a day. For a woman, that's more than 1 drink a day. 86 to 89 of people overate the number of calories needed. We're going to talk a lot about this. This is really showing that most people eat more calories than they need every day. 50 to 65% of people ate more than the recommended amount of sugar. What I find really interesting is this one. Kids under 8, 99% of them ate too much sugar. Where are they getting that sugar? In my experience, most of that sugar comes from sweetened beverages, Gatorade, Capri Sun, those kind of things. So that gives an idea of really how people are doing when it comes to food groups. When I want to get more into detail about what specific nutrients are people getting enough of, I need to use a different set of standards. And so these standards that we're going to use to look at specific vitamin and mineral and carbohydrate amounts needed every day are called the dietary reference intakes. Keep in mind that most of these are the minimum amount for things like vitamins and minerals, protein, fat, fiber, carbohydrates. So we're going to look at these different reference values. Recommended diet daily allowances are set for most vitamins and minerals. Vitamins and minerals are noted as micronutrients. So when we talk about that, we mean that we need them in very little amounts. And if you look in the back of your book in the appendices, there's appendices A through F, you will see these actual reference intakes for certain vitamins and minerals based on age and gender. Adequate intake would be on B section of the appendices, and those are set for most electrolytes. The estimated energy requirements are showing how much showing the amount of calories someone needs based on their height, weight, and activity level. And the upper limits are also in your book on E and F appendices, and those show the maximum amount of a nutrient that you should have. These are really useful to look at if someone's taking a supplement of a nutrient to see if that vitamin or mineral that you're intaking is at a level that's been determined to be too great for the human body. And daily values are also something, but they're only used on food labels. So what do these standards mean and how do we use them? One of the ways that we use them is to give a reference as to what most people should be eating. So for example, vitamin C, the recommended amount of vitamin C for a male is about 90 milligrams. So if I do a recall and I look at someone's diet and I'm able to use some software, and the software we're going to look at is the Choose My Plate Super Tracker, I can get an idea of how much vitamin C that person ate in a day. Now, knowing that the minimum amount they need for the day is 90 milligrams, I want them to get at least 2/3 of that. And again, remember that that level is the minimum amount to avoid deficiency diseases. Keep in mind that the upper limits are the maximum amount. So again, the example of vitamin C, for those males, the minimum level is 90 milligrams. The maximum level is like 2,000 milligrams. So there's a lot of play in there. So again, in the back of your book, you'll find the dietary reference intake for macronutrients. Look for the carbs, protein, fat, and fiber. You'll find the dietary reference intakes for the micronutrients, the vitamins and the minerals. And then you'll find the upper limits. So make sure you can find those, because I am going to have an extra credit question on the quiz if you can note those. But remember, those reference intakes for the vitamins and minerals are the minimum amount. It's okay if somebody has more. The upper limits are the maximum amount. The dietary guidelines are another set of kind of food rules that the government has come up with to kind of help us determine how we can be healthier so that we avoid getting deficiencies and both over and under nutrition. One of the things that the dietary guidelines focuses on is making sure that we balance the amount of calories that we have to manage our weight. As we noted, majority of people in America eat more calories than they need every day. This list also has a lot of foods to reduce, so things like animal fats, sugar, sodium, and there's also a list of foods to increase, things like fruits, vegetables, low-fat dairy, and whole grains. When I was in school, we learned about the 4 food groups. Some of you probably remember that. And then they moved to the pyramid, and now the kind of guideline that we like to teach people about is called Choose My Plate. So we're going to learn a little bit about this, but I do want you to note that I personally like the Harvard Healthy Eating Pyramid, which there's both the food for thought is on that, and then there's also a discussion on the Harvard Healthy Eating Pyramid. I think it's a much better example of how to eat healthy than the government's Choose My Plate. So when you look at the concept of balancing your calories, you may not be able to read this, but the little girl says, "Don't step on it, it makes you cry." And I think this comes from too many girls seeing their mothers get on the scale and not being happy with that. So keep in mind, it's important to balance your calories. The foods that we try to increase are the fruits, vegetable, whole grains, plant fats, and fish oils, and low-fat dairy. And the foods to reduce are saturated fats. Those typically come from animal fats. Trans fats from processed food and fried foods. Sodium. Most of the sodium that we get in our diet comes from processed foods, not the salt shaker. Most Americans eat too much animal protein. We eat too many refined grains. These are grains that don't have fiber in them. And way too many simple sugars. Simple sugars in the form of added sugars. So what counts as a serving? You can review that in your book. It's in figure 2-11. And I do want you to review that Healthy Eating Plate by Harvard. Another really good one is the Mediterranean Diet Pyramid. A lot of you in class asked what I think is the healthiest diet, and I think that if you follow these 2 guidelines, the Healthy Eating Plate and the Mediterranean Diet, which this Healthy Eating Plate is based upon, you will have the healthiest diet. You can review the physical activity guidelines, and then I'll post an extra screencast-o-matic for the food labels. All right, thank you.